Heal from fear of persecution for scapegoat survivors of narcissistic parents. Do you worry about others finding out what is wrong with you? Do you find yourself diagnosing yourself in problematic ways when you read or watch about narcissism? And does it feel hazardous for someone to get to really know you? Scapegoat survivors of a narcissistic parent learn that nothing good happens when they are known. The scapegoat child is met with hostility at so many turns. To protect themselves, they often have to create a public versus a private self. The public self can suffer many slings and arrows from the narcissistic abuser, while their private self is much more sacred, but therefore vulnerable. They stow away their private self inside where they cannot be hurt. Everyone has a different private versus public self. The contrast between these selves can seem more extreme, though, for the scapegoat survivor. People without this kind of a traumatic history may have experienced certain relationships where it felt safe for their private self to be known. And as a result, the difference between their private versus public self may be minimal. So the scapegoat survivor was forced to keep their private self hidden to survive their parents' abuse. Later, the survivor may feel like there's something wrong with them for protecting themselves this way. Like, why am I so closed off to others? Or why can't I let my guard down? These questions can feel alienating. The survivor may feel blamed for doing what they had to do to survive the undeserved hostility earlier in life. In today's video, I'll explain why the scapegoat survivor's fear of persecution is often well-founded. I hope to create a compassionate lens to view this adaptation to a narcissistic parent. Next, I'll discuss a common dilemma faced by scapegoat survivors. Being known has meant persecution, and being known now is also the path to healing. I'll describe how therapy can offer a way to resolve this dilemma. Well, my name is Jay Reed, and I'm a licensed psychotherapist in California, and I specialize in recovery from narcissistic abuse. In my professional and personal experience, I've worked to identify the fundamentals to this process. This has led me to what I call the 3 pillars of recovery. Pillar number 1 is making sense of what happened so that you know it wasn't your fault. Pillar number 2 is gaining distance, psychological, emotional, or physical distance from narcissistic abusers and closeness with safe people. Pillar number 3 is living in defiance of the narcissist rules. It's also essential to find and participate in communities of people who can get, validate, and support you along this path. I've seen and experienced large improvements in quality of life after applying these pillars. Today's video falls under pillar number 3, living in defiance of the narcissist rules. Well, if you were a scapegoat survivor of a narcissistic parent or a partner, then I encourage you to check out my free ebook on the topic. It's called Surviving Narcissistic Abuse as the Scapegoat, and it goes into other important aspects of what it's like to be in the shoes of the scapegoat child or partner of the narcissistic abuser. From self-limiting beliefs about yourself that you have to adopt to survive, to why the narcissistic personality is so geared to put the people closest to them down. I think this ebook can help you realize how none of this abuse was your fault, but rather the product of the narcissist's psychological and emotional problems. You can find the link to the book in the description box below or by clicking here. And lastly, if you find this content helpful, then I'd encourage you to subscribe to the channel. And you can also follow me on Instagram or TikTok under @JReedTherapy or Facebook under JReedPsychotherapy. The links to all of these are in the description box below. How the scapegoat child gets persecuted. A narcissistic parent needs to find the scapegoat child as worthless. Doing so allows the parent to deny their own intolerable feelings of worthlessness. The parent unconsciously projects these feelings into the child and then gets the child to assume ownership of them. And this results in the child thinking about themselves as though they are worthless. Now, the narcissistic parent feels more protected from their own worthlessness, but of course, at the child's expense. The scapegoat child faces persecution just by being close to their narcissistic parent. The child learns that the person whom they hope will be compassionate towards them is instead hostile. The more the child expresses themselves, the more ammunition the parent may have to attack them with. The child therefore has to create a public self that cannot be punctured and a private self that stays hidden from the narcissistic parent. This helps the child survive the abuse, but deprives them of genuine connection to others. Well, let's look at another fictional case example. Jeff's memories of his family were adversarial from the start. His mother always seemed to have it out for him. He felt like every time he walked into the room, she would find a reason to criticize him. Why was he slouching? Did he clean up his room like she had asked him to? Or why was he mumbling? His father would gruffly concur with his wife's attitude towards Jeff. He largely ignored Jeff and would only pay him attention when Jeff had left a mess around the house. Jeff's childhood was too busy fending off these painful attacks on his character to safely share who he was with his parents. If this is how they hurt him when he is not even showing himself, then what sort of damage would they do if he did? Jeff found some solace in time he could spend alone. He felt relief from the threat of being hurt, but painfully alone. Jeff learned to construct a public self that could weather the devaluation from his parents without him feeling too hurt. Meanwhile, his private self was under lock and key and allowed him a place to go in himself where others could not attack. Well, scapegoat children like Jeff can learn that they are at risk of persecution when around others. The only time they are safe is when they are alone. How the scapegoat survivor protects from further persecution. Scapegoat survivors may avoid letting others get to know them. The process of being known can be associated with persecution. They may caveat their relationships and friendships to convince themselves that they're not really close. They may tell themselves that their friends, say, only accept them because they're so good at hiding what is truly despicable about themselves. Survivors may also fear being labeled as pathological by people in the mental health field. And of course, this is not entirely without basis, unfortunately. However, the scapegoat survivor may find it inevitable that someone else will condemn them as mentally ill if they reveal themselves or even share how they might be suffering. After all, they've been in an environment where other people were always finding something wrong with them. Why would a mental health professional be any different? Let's again go back to the case of Jeff. He started therapy in his mid-20s and was prepared to be told that he was a narcissist. He told his therapist that he finds it hard to think about others' feelings. He said that he was very self-centered. His therapist held off on agreeing with Jeff's ideas about himself. As a more trusting relationship grew between them, they began to understand why Jeff was so adamant that he was narcissistic at the start of treatment. He thought it was only a matter of time that the therapist would state what is wrong with him, so he might as well beat the therapist to the punch. The good news is that many therapists seek to be allies with their clients. Their goal is for the client to feel like they have someone who is on their side. And this may seem understandably doubtful for scapegoat survivors, but can be well worth discovering. The dilemma of healing. The scapegoat survivor faces a profound dilemma as they start to heal. The source of healing will ultimately reside in finding it safe to know and be known by someone else. And being known is precisely what led to persecution in early important relationships. Well, in my professional and personal experience, the solution is for the scapegoat survivor to allow themselves to be known on their own terms and timeline. That is, they are not being open because they must, but because they want to. In order for this to happen, they need to participate in a relationship where the other person displays patience and acceptance. So the survivor needs to know that they do not have to rush themselves for the sake of someone else. They also need to know that the other's acceptance of them does not hinge on sharing more of themselves. They are already accepted. With this acceptance in place, the scapegoat survivor can consider what they want for themselves. If they are safe in the relationship either way, then opening up may take on a new meaning. The scapegoat survivor may consider it plausible that allowing themselves to be known might be a helpful experience for them. If the other's presence is truly a kind and accepting one, then this might feel more possible. Again, let's go back to Jeff. He continued in therapy for several years. His therapist was consistent in his positive regards towards Jeff. He was also undemanding. Jeff was free to talk about or not talk about whatever he wanted in the therapy. His therapist's interest in him did not waver either way. Well, it took Jeff a long time to get used to this sort of calm in a relationship. He was so used to the other shoe dropping where he would be attacked. Over time, it seemed that Jeff's nervous system began to relax more when he was around his therapist. He felt less of a ball in his stomach, telling him to flee or tense up for protection. Jeff's initial efforts to consider that his therapist felt safe led to him feeling like he actually must submit to his therapist, kind of abandon himself. Jeff's only experience with kindness from his mother was when she had a use for him. Initially, for him to let his therapist's kindness into his experience, he assumed that he had to become however the therapist wanted. Jeff described feeling a loss of agency and ability to choose internally. He explained, when I feel like things are going well between us in here, I feel like I have to be your servant. It was important for Jeff to notice and say this in the treatment. Over the course of a year or so, he found it safer to see the therapist as a kind person towards him without having to hand over his independence. The process of noticing what is happening as feelings of closeness arose in the treatment was part of what proved helpful to Jeff. He could express his conflict of wanting to feel close without feeling oppressed and be understood. The therapist would not shift his stance of positive regard towards him. With a lot of repetitions like this, scapegoat survivors are able to find it safer to assume that the other person could be happy for them, not because of them. Well, I hope you found today's video useful in your own process of recovery. And again, as always, I want to thank you for your continued support of this channel with the comments and support to one another. It's just, unfailingly encouraging to read each and every week. So with that, I'll look forward to posting again next Friday. Take care.